Okay, in this next demonstration, students are going to make these little vials of blood. Now, of course, these aren't real blood, but it really is a great way to show the students how the blood is made up of different parts. 3 basically different types of cells, and then the plasma that it floats around in. So what I did is I had the students gather these supplies. We used rice as platelets, and they only needed a few of those. And then they used marshmallows, and we used the little ones, the little marshmallows, and it only took 1 per vial for the marshmallows. And then we also used Cheerios right here, and we dyed the Cheerios red with some RIT dye, and that helped the Cheerios stay nice and red when we put them in the vials. So the other thing that you're going to need is just some simple household oil, like vegetable oil. I just got the cheapest oil I could find, and that's how we started that process. Okay, so your blood contains 55% plasma. Now, plasma is not red, it's more like a yellow color, so I use the oil. And I'm going to pour a little over half of the plasma, pretend plasma, in our little vial of blood. Now, plasma is important, and blood donors are doing a really good thing when I'm going to put a little more in here. Blood donors are doing a great thing when they donate their blood for plasma, because burn victims and people who have serious health conditions really need the plasma. And what plasma does for the blood is it has water in it, and it also has, it carries the red blood cells, the platelets, the white blood cells through the blood. And it also has in it enzymes, and it has salts, and it has protein molecules. It takes some waste out of the blood, some waste that the blood creates. So that is what plasma does, and we need about 55% of this yellow ingredient for the plasma. All right. Now that we have our plasma, which has like a straw colored yellow, and I used oil for the plasma, now that we've got that in our little vial, the next thing we're going to add is our platelets. Now, platelets are about less than 1% in our blood, so we don't need a lot of platelets. And as I said earlier, we're going to use rice as a pretend platelet. You can use anything you like, but I looked around my science lab and rice looked like it was convenient, so I thought, okay, I'm going to use rice. So I had my students put 2 grains of rice in the plasma for the platelets. Now, platelets are interesting little guys. They're cells that float around in the plasma, and as I said, less than 1% of the blood is platelets. Now, the reason they're called platelets is because they're flat like a plate, and when they congregate together, little appendages come out of the cells and stick together and aggregate. So they send a signal to the other platelets in the blood when there is a cut, or platelets are awesome little creatures, little cells in our blood, and we have to have them or we would bleed to death. But we don't need a lot of them. They die and they're carried off by the plasma. Now, this next little cell, it's actually not little, it's a pretty big cell, is called a white blood cell. And white blood cells are also formed in the bone marrow of the bones. And your body doesn't need a lot of white blood cells, but they need them when a bacteria or a virus or some kind of pathogen enters the bloodstream. White blood cells are like little warriors, like knights in a castle. They react to any foreign invaders that come inside the bloodstream that doesn't belong there, and they will attack. So if your white blood cell count is really high, that means you might be fighting an infection. And if you get a lot of infections and you get sick a lot, they might want to check your white blood cell count and make sure that your bone marrow is producing enough white blood cells. So what I had the students do was pick these things apart. Everybody just got one little marshmallow and they floated that in their blood. So we'll go ahead and drop those little white blood cells in there and put them down into our blood. They're kind of sticky, and that's how they really are in real life. They're round, they're white, they have little attachments that come out of them, and I'll see if I can find a picture and attach that behind me so you can see what an actual white blood cell really looks like. They're quite interesting. Another name for white blood cells is leukocytes, and leukocytes are germ killers. They're always on the lookout to seek and destroy any germs that are in your blood. Leukocytes live in your blood for about 3 days, and they also are produced inside the bone marrow. All right, the last cell that we're going to put in our blood is the red blood cells. And there almost as much space in your blood with red blood cells as plasma, but just a little bit less. Plasma has 55%, and red blood cells have 45% of the space in your blood is due to red blood cells. And as I said earlier, we're using Cheerios that I dyed red with some RIT dye the day before, and it did a great job making our blood red. I loved it. Now, this is the part of the blood that actually makes it red when we see it, and it's hemoglobin in the red blood cells that cause it to look red. Now, red blood cells are beautiful little things. They look round, but they don't quite have a hole in the center like a Cheerio does. It dips down and out. Now, the major function of the red blood cells is to transport oxygen throughout the body. So when the blood leaves your heart from the right ventricle and goes through the pulmonary artery into the lungs, the lungs give the blood oxygen, picks up oxygen there, and the hemoglobin in the blood picks up the oxygen in the red blood cells, and then it travels through the body and it goes back into the heart and gets pumped into the whole body. So that's as we discussed earlier with the heart, the blood comes into the heart through the right artery, through the right atrium. It goes into the right ventricle. Then it gets pushed out of the right ventricle into the lungs where it picks up oxygen. It comes back into the heart, and then it goes into the left atrium, goes down into the left ventricle, and comes out into the entire body. So the blood actually enters the heart 2 times, and it picks up oxygen into the red blood cells and transports it through the whole body. Now, the red blood cells also carry carbon dioxide out of the blood. That is how your blood distributes carbon dioxide and oxygen through the red blood cells. And as I said, the red blood cells are about 45% of your blood supply. So the last thing we're going to do is add our red blood cells into our blood supply. And I always tell the students, be thinking about what red blood cells do. They also determine what type of blood type we have, which we're not doing today, but there are 8 blood types. There's A, B, AB, and O. And then there's also the RH factor, so you can have A negative blood, which I have, or you can have B negative blood, AB negative blood, or O negative blood. Now we're not going to get into that today, but just so you know that the red blood cells determine what of the 8 types of blood that you have. Okay, so here we go. We've got our white blood cells down here. We've got our big red blood cells, and we've got a couple grains of rice under there to represent platelets. Now, one thing you can do to see the red blood cells in your eyes, have you ever seen anything called floaters? Well, a floater is like if you look at a light, I'm looking up at the LED lights right now in my classroom, and when I look away, I see a little black spot floating around in my eye. That's called a floater. It's actually a red blood cell, or RBC for short. And the capillaries in your eyes are so small that only one red blood cell at a time can fit through a capillary. So when you are focusing and concentrating on a light like that, your eyes are focused on that, your capillaries are there, and you can only see one red blood cell at a time floating through your eyes. So that's how you can actually see red blood cells in your eyeball, which I thought was pretty cool. So here's your blood. I hope you had fun making it, and I hope you learned about the 3 types of cells in the blood, about the plasma, which constitutes 55% of your blood, the red blood cells, which make up 45% of your blood, platelets, which rush to the cuts and form clogs and scabs. And you also learned about white blood cells that are like little warriors in your blood that protect you from pathogens and viruses and bacteria. So have fun with your blood. Bye.